Anthony Hopkins walked onto the stage with that quiet, almost regal composure he carried everywhere, his hands folded behind his back, a slight smile on his face, the audience erupting in applause while Piers Morgan stood up from his chair, offering a hand that Hopkins barely touched before sitting down. Piers leaned forward with that smirk he always used when he wanted to dig under someone's skin and said, "Sir Anthony, welcome, welcome, though I must say, I've always wondered whether your reputation for being a little cold in interviews is actually true." Hopkins chuckled softly, almost like Hannibal Lecter's shadow breathing through him, and said, "Cold? No. Honest, perhaps. I don't see the point in pretending." The crowd laughed, though there was an edge in his delivery that made Piers raise an eyebrow. "Honest," Piers repeated, tilting his head, "that's one way of putting it. Others might say detached, even dismissive. You famously walked out of interviews before, haven't you?" Hopkins didn't blink. When the questions were stupid, yes. The audience reacted with a loud mix of laughter and gasps, and Piers, clearly enjoying the moment, pushed further. "So if I ask a stupid question tonight, will you walk out?" Hopkins looked at him with that piercing gaze that once froze Clarice Starling in Silence of the Lambs and said quietly, "I might tell you to go fuck yourself first." The audience roared, half in disbelief and half in delight, and Piers leaned back in mock offense. Well, we're not wasting time, are we? Already the Knight of the Realm is threatening me on my own show. Hopkins didn't break the stare. Not threatening. Just promising honesty. Isn't that what you wanted? Piers chuckled, adjusting his tie, clearly rattled but unwilling to let go. Fair enough. Let's talk about something a little less hostile. You've had one of the most extraordinary careers in film. When you look back, do you ever feel like you've sacrificed your personal life for your art? Hopkins shifted in his chair, his hands now resting on the armrests, his voice calm but sharp. Everyone sacrifices something. You don't get to the top by being nice all the time, Piers. You should know that better than most. The crowd laughed again, knowing full well Piers' reputation for stirring controversies. Piers smiled, but there was tension in it. Touché. But you did become famous for disappearing into characters so deeply that people wondered if you were even yourself off-screen. Isn't that a kind of escape? Running away? Hopkins frowned slightly, then nodded, almost thoughtfully. Yes. Acting was my escape. Growing up in Wales, I didn't fit in. I wasn't academic. I didn't have friends. The stage gave me a world where I could matter. So yes, it was running away. But it was running towards something too. The audience applauded warmly at that moment, and even Piers softened for a second. That's a powerful admission, he said, leaning forward. But some people might say you hid behind those roles, instead of facing yourself. You've spoken about alcoholism in the past, about loneliness. Do you think you ever truly faced yourself? Hopkins' eyes narrowed, and his silence stretched just long enough to make the audience uncomfortable. You really are a bloody pest, aren't you? He said finally, the words calm but cutting. The audience laughed nervously, but Piers didn't back down. I'm doing my job. You've played some of the darkest characters ever written. Hannibal Lecter, Richard Nixon, Lear. Do you ever worry that spending so much time inside those minds took something from you? Hopkins shook his head slowly. No. They gave me something. They gave me freedom. To explore, to express, to live through them. I don't carry them home. I never did. Piers raised a finger. But you carry their legacy. Do you know how many people associate you with Lecter, with that chilling face, that voice? Some people still believe you're as frightening in person. Hopkins smirked, his tone suddenly mischievous. Maybe they're right. The audience laughed loudly, but then Hopkins' expression hardened. And maybe it's interviews like this that keep that nonsense alive. Piers shifted uncomfortably, but tried to spin it. Come on, Anthony, you can't deny you enjoyed terrifying people. The power, the recognition, Hopkins interrupted, his voice louder now, his Welsh accent cutting through. No. What I enjoyed was the craft, the work. The rest of it, the gossip, the myths, the way people like you turn performances into tabloids, that I despise. The audience applauded, and Hopkins leaned forward, his voice dropping to that low, controlled menace he did so well. So if you want me to smile politely while you needle me, you're wasting your time. I'll say it once more so you understand. Go fuck yourself, Morgan. The studio exploded, Gasps, laughter, some people clapping wildly, others looking shocked, and Piers tried to mask his discomfort with a theatrical laugh. Well, ladies and gentlemen, Sir Anthony Hopkins, never one to mince words. We might need a bleep machine before this interview's over. Hopkins leaned back in his chair, calm again, almost serene, while the atmosphere in the studio was electric, the tension palpable, as if everyone knew this interview had already gone off the rails but couldn't stop watching. Piers, regaining some composure, smirked and said, "This is going to be one of those nights, isn't it?" Hopkins only smiled faintly and replied, "That depends entirely on how stupid your next question is." The audience was still buzzing after Hopkins' blunt "Go fuck yourself, Morgan," and Piers, though smiling for the cameras, was clearly wrestling with how to regain control of the interview. He leaned forward, trying to appear unshaken, and said, "All right, Sir Anthony, you've had your fun. But let's dig deeper, because people at home don't just want to see fireworks, they want to see the man behind the legend. You've been knighted, you've won Oscars, BAFTAs, Emmys. Yet you sit here acting as if all of it doesn't matter. Surely it must matter. Surely ego plays a part." Hopkins tilted his head slightly, his calm expression unbroken. "Of course ego plays a part. I'm not a saint, Morgan. But I've learned that ego is poison if you let it consume you. You should take notes." The audience roared with laughter, and Piers smiled stiffly, clapping his hands together once. Yes, very witty. But you've admitted in the past that you can be difficult to work with, even abrasive. Is that just ego, or is it something darker? Maybe the same darkness you channel into your roles. Hopkins' eyes flickered, and for a moment it felt as if Lecter himself had appeared in the chair, cold and unblinking. "You really do enjoy prodding, don't you? You make your living off it. But let me make something clear, I'm not here to give you cheap psychoanalysis material. If I was difficult on set, it's because I demanded professionalism. That's all." Piers leaned closer, lowering his voice as though confiding in the audience. "Yet there are stories, aren't there? Stories of you refusing to rehearse with other actors, of you intimidating younger performers." Hopkins cut him off sharply. "Stories told by whom? Bitter nobodies who needed headlines? Listen to me, Morgan. I've spent decades working with brilliant actors and directors, and the people who mattered, the ones who actually did the work, they'll tell you I gave everything to the craft. The rest? Gossip." The audience applauded loudly, sensing the gravity in Hopkins' words, but Piers wasn't ready to yield. He smirked again. "So no regrets, then? Not even about your personal relationships? Failed marriages, estrangements?" Hopkins' voice cut across him like a blade. "Be careful." The entire studio went silent at that single, cold warning. Hopkins sat upright, his expression unreadable. Piers blinked, taken aback for the first time all evening, then tried to soften the tone with a half-hearted laugh. "Come now, Sir Anthony, I'm not trying to insult, I'm simply asking what the public would ask." Hopkins leaned forward, his voice dropping low, intimate, the kind of tone that carried more menace than shouting ever could. "The public doesn't ask those questions, Piers. You do. Because you want a reaction. You want headlines. But here's what you don't seem to grasp. I don't need this. I don't need you. I came here because I thought maybe, just maybe, we'd talk about the work, the craft, the art. Instead you want dirt. You want conflict. And if that's all you're here for, then you'll get it, but not the way you expect." The audience clapped again, some cheering, sensing Hopkins had turned the tables. Piers, rattled but stubborn, tried to laugh it off. "Well, you're certainly giving me something, Anthony. But since you mention the craft, let's go there. You've said before you never rehearse much, that you memorize your lines obsessively but don't practice emotion until the camera's rolling. Some critics say that's lazy. That you coast on instinct rather than digging deeper." Hopkins' expression sharpened, but his tone remained calm. "Lazy? No. Efficient. I trust my instincts because they've served me all my life. Acting is about truth in the moment, not endless repetition. If you rehearse too much, you kill the life of it. You strangle it. I'd rather arrive prepared but fresh, ready to discover. That's not laziness, it's respect for the unpredictability of art." The crowd erupted in applause, and Hopkins allowed a small smile. Piers raised his eyebrows as if to concede a point, but he wasn't done. "Interesting. And yet some directors, Steven Spielberg among them, have described you as intimidating, even controlling. Surely that's not just efficiency. Isn't there a part of you that enjoys that dominance? That enjoys reminding people you're Anthony Hopkins. Hopkins shook his head slowly. I don't remind people. They remind themselves. The intimidation comes not from me, but from their perception. If a young actor walks onto a set and sees Anthony Hopkins, and they shrink, that's not my doing. That's theirs. My job is to be there, to work. The rest is noise. The audience clapped again, but Piers pressed harder. Noise, maybe. But you can't deny you cultivate a certain aura. The silence, the stillness, that gaze. You know it unnerves people. You've used it tonight. Hopkins leaned back, his face breaking into a mischievous grin. And look how beautifully it worked. The audience burst out laughing, and Piers, though cornered, forced a smile. Touché again. But you know what? You've got the luxury of playing this mysterious, untouchable figure. Others don't. Some would say you hide behind it. Hopkins' grin faded. I don't hide. I survived. I overcame. I made a life out of nothing. And if my stillness unsettles you, Morgan, maybe it's because you're afraid of what you see reflected back. The crowd cheered wildly, sensing the verbal blow land squarely. Piers' smirk faltered, and he shifted uncomfortably in his chair. For the first time that night, he seemed unsure of his next line. Hopkins, seizing the moment, leaned in just slightly and said with quiet finality, So ask your next question wisely. I'm not your punching bag. I'm not here for your circus. And if you forget that, we'll end this conversation faster than you can say my name. The studio was electric, the tension sharper than ever, and even Piers Morgan looked momentarily subdued as the cameras caught every flicker of discomfort on his face, the audience hanging on to see whether he would back down or double down. The studio felt charged, as if everyone was holding their breath to see whether Piers would retreat or push harder. He adjusted his chair, gave a theatrical smile, and said, Well, Sir Anthony, I must say you've certainly made this one of the most combative interviews I've ever done. But I'm not easily scared off. People at home know me for pressing buttons, and tonight you've pressed a few of mine as well. Hopkins remained perfectly still, his eyes fixed on Piers with that calm intensity that seemed to silence the very air around them. Good, he said softly. Maybe now you'll understand what it feels like to be the one under a microscope, poked and prodded until there's nothing left but irritation. The audience clapped nervously, and Piers tried to steer the conversation back toward safer ground. All right, let's end on something lighter. You've spoken in the past about painting, composing music, even just enjoying solitude. Tell us, what makes you happiest now? Hopkins allowed a small, genuine smile, and his tone softened. Peace. Silence. The simple things. Waking up, making a cup of tea, playing the piano, painting. No drama. No games. The crowd applauded warmly, almost relieved by the shift, but Piers, sensing the moment was too calm, couldn't resist one last jab. No games, you say. But isn't what you did tonight a kind of game? Coming here, dressing me down, telling me too well to go fuck myself on live television. That's theater, surely. Hopkins looked at him for a long moment, then leaned forward, his voice low but firm. No, Morgan. That wasn't theater. That was truth. The audience gasped, some breaking into spontaneous applause. Piers opened his mouth to retort but was cut off when Hopkins continued, his voice now carrying a weight that hushed the room. And if the truth makes you uncomfortable, then maybe you should ask yourself why you do this. Why you enjoy needling people until they snap. You don't interview, Piers. You provoke. And tonight, you provoked me. But I'll give you this, you gave me the chance to remind myself that honesty, however brutal, is still better than performance. The crowd erupted in applause, louder and longer this time, with some audience members even rising to their feet. Piers, visibly rattled but trying to maintain composure, forced a laugh. Well, there you have it. Sir Anthony Hopkins, brutally honest as ever. I suppose I asked for it. Hopkins leaned back, his calmness restored, and delivered the final line with a wry smile. No, Morgan. You begged for it. The studio broke into chaos, cheers, laughter, whistles, while Piers, cheeks flushed, tried to laugh it off, but the cameras caught every flicker of embarrassment on his face. It was the kind of unscripted raw television moment that would be replayed for days, dissected, turned into clips and headlines. The audience knew they had just witnessed something extraordinary, an interview that began with tension, spiraled into confrontation, and ended with Sir Anthony Hopkins walking out not as a victim of Piers Morgan's provocation, but as its master. The music swelled, the show wrapped, but the buzz in the studio lingered long after the cameras stopped rolling, everyone knowing this episode would go down as one of the most unforgettable clashes ever aired.